Hello, my name is Eileen Davidson, and I'm here with Tiffany Robertson, and we're in Barcelona at EULAR 2025, and we're really excited today to be telling you about some interesting things that we learned about Still's disease. All right, so I'm going to explain a little bit about me. I'm fairly new to understanding Still's disease. I have learned what I have learned from working with AiArthritis. So I was really excited to go to this session to learn more about this particular disease, and I hope that I picked out a couple of facts that are going to be interesting to you. Now, I think there was one fact that was interesting to me because I didn't realize this, so I didn't catch on to it, but there's few differences in adult Still's disease and juvenile Still's disease. They're kind of the same disease, and that I thought was really interesting because with JIA and rheumatoid arthritis, they're two separate diseases. So I think that's kind of neat to sort of understand.
That is a really good point, because if we look back into research, even Deb, who's somewhere around here, even Deb was talking about earlier tonight, she was a young girl, she was 13 when she was diagnosed. They called it juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, which is not what it's called anymore, because they realized it's not a junior level of rheumatoid arthritis, right? And so then what ended up happening is juvenile idiopathic arthritis is a term from which other subgroups live, and systemic juvenile idiopathic arthritis lives under the umbrella. So there are several different categories that fall under JIA. In saying that, there's adult onset Still's disease, and so that is if it has onset of 16 years or older is considered adult. And for many, many years, it was always considered that they were sort of two different diseases. Maybe, I don't know, but maybe because of the differentiation of JRA from RA, and it just was like, well, we're not going down that road again. And so it was always just kind of thought of as different. And so Eileen was telling me some of the stuff that she was really excited to learn, and I had said, oh, well, part of, some of you may or may not know, but the International Still's Disease Foundation dissolved into AiArthritis in 2017. And at that time, there was a lot of conversation about, is it the same disease, is it not? And I think it was about 2021 when researchers in Europe, more on the European side, started saying, yes, it is actually the same disease. And when they say the same, they mean things like, not just about presentation, but it's about the biology. It's about the molecular structure that's on everything in the blood work. Everything is mimicking this, look like it's the same, and it didn't matter what age of onset. Oh, you learned a little bit about that today, because there's more research on proving that's true.
Yeah, and like you said, it was from 2021, so that's fairly recent research. And for us to find that now is actually pretty soon, because research takes a really long time to actually get to all the years that it needs to get to. So another thing that I found interesting during the session today is that they call it polygenic autoinflammatory disease because of the multiple components to it, and how that it's not just caused by one part of the immune system. And this is where I hand it over to Tiffany to explain that part.
And just because that's a new word for me, the polygenic. So what, poly meaning many? Yeah. So what does that word mean?
So polygenic means multiple genes kind of being the cause. So they think that adult Still's has, like, I can't remember if it was a component of it being not hereditary. So autoinflammatory diseases tend to be when they're quite young, correct? But then also there's the fact that it can come up later on in life too. So that's why I think they're calling it the polygenic, because they're kind of arguing a little bit that it's not just an autoinflammatory disease, it's also an autoimmune disease.
Yes.
So that's how it's called the polygenic autoinflammatory disease.
Okay.
Because it's coming from, I guess, two arears of the immune system.
Yeah. And so that's something that's been a really big interest in AiArthritis for a really long time, because we, our autoimmune and autoinflammatory arthritis, well, those are really just a couple sides of the immune system. And so the autoinflammatory side is the innate. That just means we're born with it. We're all born with it. This is the side that it's the one that fights off infections. And then as we get older, this side of our immune system actually kicks in even more again. And that's why a lot of older people have lower immune system problems, more infections, likelihood to get sick. And so the autoinflammatory is triggered in that side of the immune system, whereas autoimmune is triggered, it's an acquired immunity, meaning you learn it, your body learns it, and so that's why it has to have an environmental component. And so what Eileen was finding out today, this is the first time we've heard them talk about this a lot in stills. We've heard about it in lupus, we've heard about it in psoriatic arthritis or psoriatic disease, it's falling under that umbrella. And also in spondyloarthritis diseases. So it's not a new theory for it to be bridging, but it's new today, and because it's not something that we've heard a lot about in Still's disease.
Yeah, and then kind of moving on to sort of the same topic, one thing that they brought up was the biomarker of IL-18 and how this biomarker is the biomarker that distinguishes Still's disease from other autoimmune diseases.
And we know, so if you've come with us in the past to some of these Go With Us, you may remember we have reported back on IL-18. And when we say these are interleukin, okay, so you might be familiar with different biologics, and you'll hear like IL-6, IL-8, I mean, those are interleukin. And so they're literally zeroing in on that component of our immune system, and in stills it has an overabundance or an overproduction, and so the idea is to hinder the production. And so over time they've been doing research studies. We saw some a few years ago where they were able to differentiate certain people who are susceptible to macrophage activation syndrome versus not having this IL-18. And so they're really zeroing in on that as science and research to be able to help to differentiate diagnosis. I know a lot of people with Still's disease, even though there are some pretty common features, they're not all, we're all different and we're all unique. And you'll hear some Still's patients even say 25% of Still's patients don't even have the inflammatory arthritis at onset. And so think about, like, they often are misdiagnosed with infection and viruses and things of that nature. So think about how amazing that could be if we could identify a biomarker or something of that nature to start to differentiate and get in earlier.
Absolutely. And do you want to go over the big news that happened during the session? I thought this was really interesting. I love being present when they announce big news in any of the AiArthritis disease communities.
So it ended up, so I didn't see the whole session. So I came in at the tail end of it, and when I sat down, they started talking about Still's lung disease, which I have never heard of. And I thought, what is that? Because we've heard, and we have done a lot of projects too at AiArthritis on rheumatoid arthritis, interstitial lung disease, systemic sclerosis, and all of these kind of lung presentations. And we know that there are pulmonary issues anyway in Still's. So this is different though. This is specifically they're calling it Still's lung disease, and it's very early, so they don't even have a specific diagnostic. So if you think about, if you go to a doctor and they try to diagnose you or something, there's different things that, like a checkbox, right? And so these are kind of the clinical diagnostic things. They don't have the set clinical diagnostic for this yet. There's a lot of rheumatologists, doctors, researchers who are kind of going back and forth and saying, okay, I think if you have XYZ biomarker, or you have early onset MAS, which is the macrophage activation syndrome, and the XYZ, that you might be a candidate for this. But then there's others who say, well, now we're doing more research and now that's not showing up to be true. One of the big things that came out about this, I have to put my glasses back on, was called DRESS, which is associated drug reaction and eosinophilia and systemic symptoms. And essentially what it means is there is some research, it's early, so that
very early.
Remember, early research means that when more research happens, it may be disproven as well. So, and they presented this research that showed that some of the biologics, in particular, that were targeting certain, the IL-1s and the IL-6s, those blockers, in some patients, they were having adverse reactions that were presenting some symptoms in their lungs. And because of that, the FDA, which is the Food and Drug Administration in the United States, has said if you have Still's disease, or telling doctors if a patient has Still's disease and they're presenting with certain symptoms and they're on an IL-1 or an IL-6 blocker, that they should be pulled off of these biologics because it could be a trigger to turn into this lung disease. However, then there was other research presented that said there are these databases that they have looked into on Still's disease patients who have been on these certain treatments or have not been on these certain treatments and still got this. So the trigger is unknown, but the fact is it's a thing.
Yeah.
And so we don't want everybody to run out and say, if you have Still's disease, and say, oh my gosh, I heard of this lung disease. Oh my gosh, we don't want you to do that. Just trust AiArthritis to continue giving you updates on this. And know it's very, very early, but it's good when they start to learn new things about our diseases.
Yeah, it's really exciting too, especially being there and seeing the professionals that are studying these diseases present really interesting information.
Absolutely. And I think that even when we just say with Still's is so complicated and there is pulmonary issues or lung issues anyway, just even seeing there could be some subgroups. Like we're just thinking of patients more on an individual and subgroup level than as a whole, and that is always very positive. So that was not even mentioned in the opening of like when they give you a synopsis of what you're going to see.
Yeah.
And we both were like, what is Still's lungs? So there you go. That was presented for the first time today.
I think they wanted to make it a big look at what we found out.
And it was in the Still's session. So for those who have Still's disease, I know sometimes you have felt a little left out in the research world.
Not this time.
It was in the biggest auditorium size session. Like there's only one that gets the big features.
It's where they have the opening reception, they give all the awards. So for the fact to be there means it was really big news, and it means that there is such great emerging research happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that was most of what we wanted to report back on.
It was very heavy scientific. There was some mice models involved, so that went over my head, I'll be perfectly honest, but from the bits that I did learn and also clarified by Tiffany, I thought it's just very interesting news.
Yeah, and we'll also report back after we look at the slides in a little bit more detail. They had one part that was talking about just some more clinical trials looking at treatments that are working really great in Still's. We just want to make sure before we report back that we have all of those in place.
They also showed some slides of interesting papers, so we will be sure to find those, if they're open, of course, and send those to you as well.
All right, sounds good.
Okay. Well, after a very long day, I think we are going to bed now.
I think we are. All right.
Good night or good morning, everyone.